Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Practical Retention. I would just like to do a quick check. Can everybody hear me okay? If you can type in the chat box, that will be fabulous. Oh, where you don't have any sound, you might want to check your browser. Sometimes the browser has problems. I'm in Chrome. So anyone that's having any sound problems, it is always best to try and re-sign in under a different browser if that is possible. Okay, so I want to remind everybody that the webinar is being recorded, and we'll have a copy of the recording afterwards. If for any reason you need to drop out because you get a phone call or an email, that is absolutely fine, not a problem. Welcome to everybody for joining us. So today I am joined by Charlotte Martin, who is the founder of Shredding Made Simple. So Charlotte, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank Kelly and Regina at Databasix for asking me to join their webinar. I'm looking forward to explaining the data retention and destruction side of the business. So Shredding Made Simple is a year old. However, it's a family-run business with 30 years experience within the shredding industry. So I look forward to explaining a bit more about what we do and how we can help.
Excellent. So we're going to get a little bit nerdy about retention and disposal. So hopefully everyone is excited as we are to talk about this subject. So I want to start off with the real nerdy stuff from the regulation, just to set out why retention is so important. So there are two parts of the General Data Protection Regulation that talks about storage limitation. The first is Article 5, where it says that you cannot keep personal data that is identifiable for no longer than is necessary. And it's important that we focus on the no longer than is necessary. And then Article 25, which is talking about the theory of privacy by design and by default, is that you, as a data controller, have to make sure that you put in appropriate technical and organizational measures by default, so that you can keep the data secure, and when it's no longer needed, you can appropriately dispose of that, which is why Charlotte is joining us today. So I'm going to first start about thinking about the risks I think that you should consider. So if you don't take retention seriously, there is an impact for you as a business. If your data forms part of a breach, you may find as part of that breach that you have more data exposed than you expected because you've been keeping data for far too long. And if you're investigated, the questions will be asked of you, why do you still have this information? If you keep data for too short a time, you could find yourself not being able to fulfill your obligations to respond to complaints or defend any legal claims. You may have customers that are dissatisfied if they feel that you are keeping their data longer than is necessary, or in fact, you've not kept their data for a long enough time, so they're having to repeat certain information. And the other risk is you fail to maintain records that you are legally obliged to hold on to. And that can cause you to have potential penalties coming your way if you don't fulfill those requirements. So I wanted to start off with a bit of news to explain that most people think about data breaches and they think about high security flaws or hacking. And actually, just before Christmas last year, the UK's Information Commissioner, who's responsible for enforcing data protection in this country, fined a London-based company, Doorstop Dispensary, a pharmacy-based company, £275,000 because they dumped 500,000 medical records that had sensitive information in unlocked containers. And as you can see, the ICO referred to them as being cavalier in their approach to data protection. So don't think that financial penalties are only associated with breaches in the form of losing personal data. You can be fined for not following the regulation. So I want to talk about where you really should start from when thinking about retention. So you can't, in my honest opinion, you cannot write a retention schedule for your organization if you don't understand what data you have, where you have it, and where it's stored, and what your obligations are in relation to that types of personal data. So the very first starting point before you write a retention policy or a disposal policy is you have to ask yourself, have you mapped your data properly for your organization? And is this kept up to date? So you may have mapped your data 2 years ago. Is it still relevant today? Because if you've added new data, you may have to follow new retention periods. So the question would be, ask yourself, have you already mapped your data flows? If so, is it up to date? And have you logged that in what the regulation refers to as your register of processing activities? Now, once you've mapped your data, you'll have a real idea of the purposes. So you have to hold data for financial reasons. You have to hold information from an employment law perspective, etc., etc. And then you should be thinking about categorizing that data. So is it employee information? Is it client data? Is it information about suppliers? Is it about function? So when we think about functions, we're thinking about HR. Is it about service, customer services? Is it about business development or accounting? So you can segment the data in various ways, and that might help when you're looking at retention period. So you might want to say, I'm going to deal with all the finance function and retention first. What are the rules that relate to finance? And then maybe move on to HR. And there will invariably be some overlap, because finance obviously process payroll on employee information. So think about how you're going to categorize your data. By far, one of the biggest questions I ever get asked is, how long can we keep data for, Kelly? I get the cheeky question of, can we keep it forever? And my answer to that is, unless you're holding it for archival or statistical purposes, you are incredibly unlikely to be able to justify keeping data forever. However, depending on your field of expertise, some regulations require you to keep data for 75 years. But here's some examples of statutory and non-statutory retention periods. So statutory are things like employment. So unsuccessful candidates you'll keep for 6 to 12 months. One of the common themes I see in companies is that they don't keep CVs at all. Once the recruitment period is done, they dispose of them. And you could find yourself in hot water if a candidate comes back and challenges you in terms of how you've handled their recruitment process. There are health and safety laws. So you identified your data, you know you have to keep some for like accidents, for example, and an indication here is data that's relating to emergency medical care or information that's pertaining to fitness to work. You can hold for up to 6 years. And the other common question I get is, we can keep data for 7 years for everything. And that's because typically financial records are kept for 7 years. It doesn't mean that all data can be kept for 7 years. Now, the question you may be asking yourself, well, it's all well and good that there are laws that are telling me how long to hold data, but what happens when there aren't any laws? So there's no laws that say how long can we keep customer correspondence for? What should we do? So when there's nothing written down in statute, you need to be considering the following things. So are there industry standards or best practice guidelines that indicate how long you should be holding on to records for? What are the business drivers for retaining that information? So an example will be, your customer records are unique to you and your business. You may say that, for example, you're a law firm and that you will keep case files for up to 10 years. You may be a fitness organization and say, actually, when someone buys a gym membership, we'll keep their data for the duration that they're a member, but then, you know, after 2 years, we'll get rid of it, because if they've not re-engaged, they're not going to. So different periods are determined by you and your industry and the way that you work with your clients and prospective clients. I suppose, and the other thing to think about are, ask your insurance provider. Your insurance provider may stipulate, if you're working with sensitive data or protected characteristics, like maybe you're working with children or you're working with vulnerable adults, they may say not only is there legal requirements for you to collect certain data, they may say legally and from an insurance perspective, they want you to hold data for a set period of time. And we all can receive complaints, as much as we don't want to. Do you need to hold on to certain data to be able to successfully support a complaint or investigate a complaint? So you might be at this stage, you might have mapped your data, you might have kind of like, I know the different categories of information, I've got an idea of how long I should be keeping stuff legally, as well as I've considered things that I think are necessary to keep. But you also need to be really mindful of your supply chain. So today, very rarely does a business just hold their data for themselves. There is normally some other organizations involved. You may have contracted a data processor to do work for you. So you may have an external payroll bureau. You may have an external PA service. You may engage with a shredding company. They are processing your data. So the question is, what are your contractual agreements between you and them about what they need to demonstrate to you that they are going to be compliant with the regulation, but most importantly, they are going to respect your retention periods. If you are a data processor, so maybe you're a market research company, maybe you're an accountancy firm where you act as a processor, or you're a payroll bureau, for example, or you're a cloud provider, if you outsource any of your work to sub-processors, they have to respect the retention periods as well. So please be mindful of the impact that retention has on your supply chain, because it is all incredibly important. And if there are any situations where any of you work with another company where both companies determine what data is going to be collected, and you have agreed that you are joint controllers, you both have to determine the retention periods. So please always remember your supply chain. Now I'm going to hand over to Charlotte, who's going to talk about what to consider when actually your retention periods expire and the importance of disposing of data.
Brilliant, thank you, Kelly. So securely disposing of personal data, once the data reaches the end of its life cycle, what do? Will you dispose of it? Well, how do you know that you're securely disposing of your data? So the data disposal policy, it should be covered within your policy that how you are going to destroy your data. Now, your disposal policy should cover the removal or overwriting of destruction of data for your devices, hard drives, storage drives, or paper, and how you process the destruction side of this. Now, data versus assets. So this is your actual data versus the device or paper copy. So we follow 3 guidelines, which is permanently deleting files. We refer to this as, have you permanently deleted files that you have? So it's easy enough to click delete on an email, but that goes into a recycling bin. That's not permanently deleting. It works the same way for paper. So if you put paper into a recycling bin, that's not actually permanently destroying it. So any data that could end up being recovered, you need to check per device how it works per different devices for permanent deleting. Also, you've got undertaking a full reset. So we use the example of if you've got a staff member that's left, they've got their old laptop, are you using a full reset? Now, bear in mind, this doesn't completely remove all data. However, it can be overwritten. This is then for a new employee because the previous employee may have personal stuff on their computer that needs to be kept private. Now, the final one is data at the end of its life cycle. So we all know that technology is great, but when it comes to the end of its life cycle, it gets slow, you need to replace it, you need to make sure that data is destroyed. So this is the cycle that I'm going to go on to about proof of destruction. You need to make sure that it has been completely destroyed. Otherwise, it can be recovered. So on-site storage, this is between realizing what needs to be archived and destroyed and prior to it being collected and disposed of. Now, you might have a lockable cabinet or cupboard. We also recommend that you have key employees to do this stage. So not everybody has access. So you can keep a track of who's had access to the data. Regular schedules for data destruction. So this might be if you've got plenty of paper that you produce within the office, you might have a secure cabinet container that you can put your paper that needs to be destroyed into. And then it might be every 2 weeks you have a collection of destruction. And also clear signage across the storage, what needs to happen, what regulations. So we then move on to education of staff. Now this is key. It's great if you know about it, and it's great if you've got the data policies, but you must ensure that it's put across the company and everybody gets an understanding of this. So about permanently deleting, sounds simple, but sometimes things need to just be run through. The best practice of data disposal, on-site storage, where it's kept, how old until you need to dispose of it, and enhanced training for key employees, so people that are going to be looking after the data in between and liaising with the provider that's going to destroy this. And then the final part, which is the most important part that I'd recommend when you're looking for a provider, is the proof of destruction. Now, providing a certificate of destruction is the trail that keeps that proves to clients, or even as a homeowner getting rid of documents, it's proof that it's been destroyed. If it ever came back that somebody's had a problem with data and they've come to you and said, how has somebody got hold of my data? You can confidently say, I've got proof of your destruction of data. So a bit of advice is, if you are going to use an office shredder, make sure that it's a cross-cut shredder. So it's pretty easy for once you put in a piece of paper and it's a line shredder, and you can easily piece that back together. Now a cross shredder cuts it into fine pieces. You also need to find the time to do this, along with, do you have the time to rip pages out of a notebook that's quite thick that won't fit through the shredder? So again, it's cost, time, maintenance, and also there's no proof that it's been destroyed. There's no trail of when was it destroyed. And like Kelly mentioned, non-compliance to GDPR is very expensive. So £275,000 that company was fined because they didn't dispose of their data in the correct manner. Now, this also covers paper. However, what about hard drives? Now, with shredding, there's different machines, different types and styles, different cuts of styles. So with the machines, you've got the paper shredder. This cannot take any hazardous waste. So you are unable to put in batteries. So for example, I couldn't put a mobile phone into a paper shredder because, to be point blank, it's explosive. So there's different types of shredders. You've got the hard drive shredders. Again, can't accept batteries, but the device is removed. The hard drive, is removed from the device, and that's how they're destroyed. They're then put into small pieces once they're destroyed, and they're then recycled. So they're not put into landfill. We like to recycle what we destroy. The same with paper, is turned into tissue paper, newspapers, hand towels, once it's been shredded. Now, mobile phones, they're a little bit more complex. They have to have the battery removed from the devices, and then the device can be destroyed in the same way a hard drive can be. And then the batteries are actually sent off separately to be recycled. So again, it's more complex. It's not as simple as putting everything into one shredder. And just to recap then, so make sure you do have a policy in place and you've got a plan for end of life cycle once the data is expired. Clearly communicate the expectations for data disposal. All data should be stored securely up to the point it's destroyed, so lockable cabinets, filing cabinets that can be locked. Help your employees get it right with regular training. It's really important. It takes 5 minutes just to run through regular training with an employee just to keep them up to date with what's going on and the processes. And your proof of destruction, sorry. So this again, when looking for a provider, make sure they can offer a proof of destruction. So some people call it a certificate of destruction, proof of destruction. But it is a regular collection of data, can start from as little as £15. And it provides confidence in data security handling, and it minimises the waste going to landfill as we do recycle what we can afterwards. And credible shredding providers will guarantee that 100% of your paper is recycled and are increasing the recycling of hard drive components. So that is an example of a day-to-day life at Shredding Made Simple.
I think that's really cool. And what I think was really quite interesting about that is all the considerations that you need to think about. So I think the challenge is, how long do I keep data? And then I think it might be too easy to destroy data, or I'm just going to put it into a bin, which I've seen people just put full records into a normal bin, not even a shredding bin. I have seen examples of, plastic bags being dumped outside offices because they've done the job. And there has been a case, I think it was about 5 years ago now, an NHS organisation dumped computers in a skip outside of the hospital, and because they were computers, they got the actual skip got emptied because someone stole the well, you can't really steal it, it's outside the property, but they essentially took the computers and they sold them on eBay. And what they found is that the computer itself still had highly sensitive medical information on it, and at the time the NHS Trust got fined just shy of £500,000 because of that. So I think it was a very important point that your policy, when you come to an end of a life cycle, your destruction and disposal policy has to separate out what is the paper process for destruction and what is the electronic destruction. I think is incredibly important. And then making that practical in, like what you said, every couple of weeks, consider, when is the shredding going to be picked up? What happens when a staff member leaves? Where are we going to put the devices that are no longer going to be used, but we are going to put them up for destruction? So I think that was very useful advice. And what we typically find is that you can combine a retention and a disposal policy so they work together. It is important that you, as Charlotte said, you educate the staff, because one of the most regular questions I get, apart from how long can I keep the data for, is, well, how do we make this work, Kelly? How do we actually follow this through? So you have to educate the staff. It's all well and good saying we keep financial records for 6 years. If none of your team know that, you may find that you're holding records on finance records for 20 years, or you have an off-site storage unit that the provider has never actually got rid of any of the data. It's still sitting in the storage unit. So please, as a recap, when you're thinking about retention, know what data you need to keep and how long you need to keep it. Educate your staff to make sure that they are aware of what their roles and responsibilities are. And when the data is genuinely no longer needed, think about how you're going to safely and securely dispose of that information, whether in paper or electronic form. And just to re-emphasize, please very much, if you are using external providers for any of that, make sure they are aware of what their responsibilities are when it comes to retention, because they too will have to have a disposal policy. Which rather nicely brings us on to the element of questions now. So this is your time for anybody that's on the webinar to ask me and Charlotte any questions. So I've got a couple of people that now need to suddenly shoot off, which is fine. You'll have a copy of the recording. So I've got a really good question here, which is, can we absolutely rely upon a post-destruction certificate? What other checks would we do to demonstrate our compliance as a data processor? Charlotte, what would you suggest as a response to that?
So, I mean, we have a transfer note as well. So what we do is when we collect, we also sign and get you to sign as well a transfer note. This is from collection at your property or office to site. It is then signed by the driver to say it's been dropped off at the site. It's then, when it's destroyed, the person that has destroyed it has signed it. Each sack, when it's collected, if it's a paper shredding sack, has a consignment number. So that then is traceable. So you could ask us, okay, when was this sack destroyed? We would be able to trace that from the consignment number and who destroyed it on what date as well. So that's our trail of where the data's been, to keep an eye on everything.
I think that's a really useful piece of advice. So don't just depend on the certificate, because I think the argument is that anybody could produce a certificate. It's more that additional audit trail of, I want you to be able to demonstrate. Have you ever been asked to, has anyone ever audited you, or could you ever be audited by a client that says, actually, I want you to prove that certain sacks have been shredded?
Personally, I haven't been asked, I haven't been audited because I provide the customer with the details. So everything, all the paperwork we fill out, we provide that to the customer. If I was audited, absolutely, I'd be able to get you a trial 100%, because the company that I deal with, they keep it all as well. So if you ever did need confirmation of a consignment sack that you need that information, I could get that for you. Yes.
So one of the other questions that we've got is about, do we have any recommendations for data mapping tools? So there are a number of vendors on the market that have software products that allow you to map the data at various costs. We ourselves are developing a online information asset register, which will be available from September. And the Information Commissioner has a free option for anyone that wants a starter for 10 in terms of what's involved in mapping. I'm happy to share the links to that if anyone is interested or is even interested in how we can map. Aside from actual tools, there are companies such as ours that will actually come in to a site, or virtually, now that we're living in the COVID world, where we will help map data for clients. Hopefully that was helpful. Do we have any other questions from anybody on the call? Charlotte, did you have, and I think you said that you might have already had someone ask you a question before the webinar,
yeah.
that you need to just cover?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a few questions that I get asked. Something else to consider, I've been asked, somebody's asked, do you destroy company clothing? Now, yes, we do. Now, company clothing works exactly the same way in data and protecting your business. So if you've had a rebrand, a redesign, logos, do you want somebody wearing your clothing and representing your business? So again, it works the same way. And yes, we do have garment shredders, and that again is recycled. So yes, that is a service that we offer. So that's just another thing to think about that we've been asked. Another question that we get asked as well is, with the paper, what happens? Like the paper sacks, are they sealable? So our paper sacks, they are a stick down sack. Once you've filled the paper sack, the whole sack is then closed and is put straight into the shredder. From collection, it goes straight into the shredder. So there is no there's no way of getting that data other than when you put that into the paper shredding sack. So that's an important thing to think about as well, is that data won't be seen once you've put it into the paper shredding sack.
Cool. And I know that I think that's a really useful point and some really interesting questions. And I'm just going to make a note. I did have a couple of questions from people who couldn't make the event today but asked me. So I've got a couple of questions from legal sector. And I've got one that says, how long can we keep letters to prospects, bearing in mind that we are processing personal data to output and retain the letters? And I think it's, if you recall earlier, what I talked about was that you have legal requirements and then you'll have things that are non-statutory, and a lot of prospective communications fall under that category. So it is important, one, to acknowledge that you are retaining that information, and then you need to think about the necessity of keeping that data and what is a reasonable length of time to be holding that. If it's say someone's buying a house and actually someone doesn't buy a house every year, and a prospective client may only come back every couple of years, you may say, actually, what's a reasonable length of time is I'm going to hold on to this information for 3 years. And at the point of 3 years, if we haven't had any engagement, we will shred the paper copy as well as get rid of the electronic record on the system. The other question I had, and it's relating to not just to law firms but to accountancies, is where there are cases where you have to keep data for us, for almost forever. And you would have recalled I said that's a real challenging argument. But if you're having to do things like conflict checks, so you need to confirm that you have never worked on behalf of this client in the past, and actually if you was to, it would create a conflict, then actually the regulation, not the GDPR, but your regulators dictate how long you should hold that information for. So don't just check legal obligations, check what your membership or best practice guidelines are on things such as that. So whilst you may be demanded of the client to delete data, you'll have to say, I'm sorry, I can't delete it because I need to be able to prove that I'm never going to be in a position of conflict in this particular scenario. But again, you would very much describe that in your retention schedule. So are there any other questions that we have? Oh, I can see some typing going on. So whilst the typing is continuing, I will just quickly do a brief summary on us, what we might be able to help you with, should you be interested. So Databasix provides, we can write policies, procedures, we do write retention schedules, we do provide training on retention. We do help organisations map their data, and in fact, we help organisations identify gaps. But I wanted to particularly take a very short amount of time to talk to you about the training that we offer. If you're looking for new staff training on data protection, if you are requiring support on breaches and subject access requests, we can provide you online training that is facilitated by myself or by Regina. We can also provide specific training such as on retention, data protection impact assessments. All of this you can find on our website. So we have one question, which I'm just going to go back to before I let Charlotte just do a recap on her business. Is Charlotte, do you have any recommendations for businesses in other locations? Obviously, you're based in Whitney, but do you cover a wider geographical area?
Yeah, absolutely. So we cover Oxfordshire. There is a company in Hertfordshire as well that I know of. But absolutely, if afterwards you'd like to have a chat and let me know whereabouts you are, I could definitely find a suitable disposal destruction company for you. Absolutely.
Perfect. I think that's a very nice offer, and I'll make sure that that is shared. Charlotte, do you want to do a quick summary just to remind people of the offer that you have for Shredding Made Simple?
Yeah, absolutely. So Shredding Made Simple, we offer paper destruction, hard drive destruction, clothing destruction, all within a compliable and secure manner. So we like to make sure that your data is safe and is destroyed in the correct manner, and that you feel comfortable and trusted that we can do this. So we are a year old. However, we are a family-run business with 30+ years experience, and we're happy to help.
Fabulous. So before I sign off the webinar, if anyone does want a follow-up, please indicate in the text box below, and we'll make sure that happens. We'll definitely follow up on the recommended businesses in other locations. I'll make sure Charlotte has that information. I would like to ask everybody to I'd like to thank everybody for taking part in today's webinar, for giving us almost 40 minutes of your time. I hope that it has been useful. It will be available on our website, and Charlotte can also make it available on her website should you need to listen to it again or share it with any of your colleagues. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope you all have a very good day, and I hope everyone that's listened to this afterwards has also enjoyed the webinar. So thank you, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Thank you, Charlotte, for taking part and being my co-host.
Thanks for inviting me.